Another rain-delayed NASCAR race moved to a Monday afternoon that everybody should have watched, but few could. Ford has a brand new front leader in its backyard, and oh, by the way, are they Final Four contention? Yeah, we're going to break down everything that we saw out at Michigan over the weekend and on Monday morning, today on Shifting Gears. I'm Alan Bailey, and before the rain comes back, make sure that you mash that subscribe button so that you do not miss a video, and make sure that you log on to AmericanRacingNetwork.com for the latest motorsports news. ARN, the Motorsports Authority. Chris Buescher going back-to-back for the first time in his career, winning at Richmond last weekend and out at Michigan on Monday afternoon. A lot of people are saying that this could be a big turning point for RFK and for Ford, and I actually think it's right. In case you missed it over the weekend, Chris Buescher with RFK and Ford went ahead and held off a very hard-charging Martin Truex Jr. And honestly, Ford, especially RFK, kind of dominated over the weekend out at Michigan. Yes, they had very strong performances. Brad was up front, but due to a pit strat that didn't exactly go his way, he was relegated to a fourth-place finish with his teammate and car winning the race and doing it in a power statement move. For the first time in his career, Chris Buescher going back-to-back in victories in the Cup Series, winning out at Richmond last race and Michigan over the weekend, well, more accurately Monday morning. And it's impressive because the last 67 laps were under green. This is very remnant of what we see at Michigan, specifically what we used to see at Auto Club Speedway in Fontana when it was a 2-mile track. And honestly, it brought my heart some joy as somebody who grew up in Southern California, who went to every single Auto Club 2-mile race. It was cool to see this type of racing return. I actually really enjoy this. Fuel strat, tire management, all get thrown in there. And yes, drafting and your horsepower all kind of combine in there. You look at it just from a pure statistic standpoint. This was a pretty darn good Cup race. Honestly, it was. 9 cautions, it's the most we've seen at Michigan since 2006. Yeah, it's been a minute. We saw 26 lead changes, which is the most since 2012 when Greg Biffle won at the track, and the most that we've had in a Cup race at Michigan in general, which is honestly impressive. Seriously. Like Pocono, Michigan got cut from a 2-race date. They went from 500 miles to 400 miles, only having 1 date this year, and I actually really like this. You look at the summer stretch, especially throughout the 2000s, NASCAR fell into that category in the midsummer of, oh, we're going back to Pocono, meh. Oh, we're going back to Michigan, meh. Oh, we're going to Chicago, meh. Everything was just kind of meh in the beginning, and nobody really cared about NASCAR in the summer months. And honestly, Pocono and now Michigan have both become those, ooh, yeah, you gotta watch this, because this is some pretty darn good racing. And that's precisely what we got on Monday. And yeah, I know. Rain spoils another Cup race that gets started on Sunday and moves to a Monday. It's going to absolutely kill the ratings, I know. And it's a shame because we saw a phenomenal race on Monday and on Sunday. Arguably, the racing was better on Monday when the heat was out just a little bit. Yes, they were dealing with some cloud covers and the track wasn't 100% slick, but we still got some pretty phenomenal racing on Monday. And it just really sucks that a majority of people didn't get to enjoy this simply because of the broadcasting rules. A lot of people were at work or on the go. Even Kelly Earnhardt Miller was tweeting out on Sunday that she was trying to watch the race, even though she pays for the service to watch it on her phone. She was outside of her coverage area, meaning she couldn't watch the Cup race, and she actually tweeted out that she gave up trying to watch it. Somebody who's literally invested in the sport couldn't watch the race because of weird TV contracts. I truly cannot wait for NASCAR to go to all streaming, or at least partially get some type of streaming service that is readily available for everybody. Hello, CW. But it begs the question, is RFK back? That's Roush Fenway Keselowski. Maybe. Honestly, at the moment, I am comfortable saying that they are, hands down, the best Ford team in the Cup Series. They've consistently been running and finishing in the top 10 better than any other Cup Series program right now under the Ford umbrella. Penske is simply missing something. We already know that Stewart-Haas is just on a different planet somewhere in the 30s, with Harvick somehow managing to squeak out top 10s here and there, but once he retires at the end of the season, we're never going to see a Stewart-Haas finish in the top 10 in all of 2024, mark my words. But let's actually talk about RFK here for a second, specifically Chris Buescher. The guy honestly gives me Matt Kenseth vibes. Very quiet, reserved guy who doesn't make a whole lot of noise off the racetrack and barely any on the racetrack. And he just goes out there and he's going to be the Mr. Consistency, rattling off a win here or there. This is something that we've seen Kenseth do time and time again. When he won his title in 03, he was the guy who went out there and won a single race, basically took the provisional start every other race after that season, and somehow worked his way up and into the top 10, won the thing on consistency. Those days are long gone, partially because of Matt Kenseth in 2003, and Chris Buescher, I don't think is going to get far into the postseason because of being consistent. I think he's just simply going to be bad fast, because you look at it. Fords are good at short tracks, which is why Chris Buescher won at Richmond. And oh, by the way, he's a talented driver. And oh, by the way, they're the best Ford team right now. Let's put that to bed, which means he should, in theory, be pretty darn decent by the time we get to Phoenix. But can he get to the Final Four? That's the big question. Let's look at Michigan. Michigan is a racetrack where you need horsepower. You need that aero dependency. You need all of these things working together in order to be good. And that's what we saw out of Ford, specifically with Keselowski and Buescher. But more specifically, when you take a package like this, when your program is, pardon the pun, firing on all cylinders like RFK is right now, the speed at Michigan will essentially translate into speed at Darlington, Homestead, Kansas, Texas, all those mile and a halves. Not a one-for-one transfer, mind you, but it means that they should be pretty darn good. But the big one that we all have to keep an eye on after what Joey Logano pulled off in 2022 is Las Vegas. Honestly, that's probably the biggest race of the year, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. If you win that and you lock yourself into the Final Four, essentially you get to go on cruise control for the next 2 weeks like Logano did last year and only work on the final race out at Phoenix like Logano did last season. And I think the team saw that and they kind of realized, oh yeah. And this to me says whether Chris Buescher or Brad Keselowski or anybody else, whoever wins that Las Vegas race will have a substantial leg up for the championship race out in Phoenix in November. I'm calling it right now. Honestly, Buescher and Keselowski, I think, are the guys that are going into Vegas this year with the expectation of we will win out here. I think Buescher has a little bit more of an advantage because he has these 2 wins, because now he, in theory, should go further. Does he make the top 8? I think he does, honestly. As long as he runs as consistent as he's been running now, he should. Now, is he going to make the Final Four? I don't know. Simply because everything that we're saying right now about Ford, about Chris Buescher, about RFK, we were saying last year about Kevin Harvick. Remember, Harvick in 22 did the exact same thing. He won at Richmond, and then the very next week, he won at Michigan. And everybody said, Ford's back. Here comes Stewart-Haas. They're the playoff favorites. And I never bought into that rhetoric because they never came off as that all season long. And after the Michigan race, they showed flashes of brilliance. But by the time the playoffs started, he laid an egg, and we all know how that playoff run went. Now, I do think that things are different with RFK and with Chris Buescher specifically, because you look at what happened, you look at the timeline of events. Chris Buescher was teamed up with his current crew chief that won the Xfinity titles over at Roush with him in the late 2020 season, right when Brad was getting out of Penske. And then when Brad went over to RFK and it became RFK, the next gen started and things started changing rapidly over at RFK. They started hiring new people, moving things around, investing into the equipment a lot more, doing things to make that organization better. And that was 100% all Brad Keselowski as an owner saying, we're changing things, we are changing the culture here, we are changing the atmosphere here, and we are going to be contenders. We knew that 2021 was going to be a rebuild year, which it was. We knew that 22 could produce a victory, and it did, with Chris Buescher winning at the Bristol night race after the playoffs had already started. Then this season, we saw those flashes of brilliance. They were running in the top 5, running in the top 10. And now that we're looming into the playoffs, about to get into them in a few weeks here comes RFK starting to peak at maybe not necessarily the right time, but peaking in late summer. And that is something that you should be doing. You look at all the tracks in the postseason, honestly, they kind of favor Chris Buescher just a little bit. So he could be a sleeper Final Four pick, honestly, but we cannot make that determination. I can't tell you who the Final Four are going to be. If it was going to start right now, I'd say keep an eye on Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr., Kyle Larson, and Chris Buescher. Those are probably my Final Four at the moment. But that will change in 2 weeks. That will change in 1 week, because that is how quickly things change in the NASCAR Cup Series. Things change. They evolve. You see some teams start to find some speed and some teams start to lose a little bit of speed. It honestly 100% depends on what development and what things happen behind the scenes between now and the postseason. And honestly, they're trending in the right direction. I just don't feel comfortable saying lock Chris Buescher into the Final Four. I am kind of saying he may make the top 8. That I'm not 100% ready to commit to that decision, but it feels like he's going to make the top 8. Now, the other point that I have to make here, Chase Elliott's done. He sealed his fate today at Michigan. He must win sometime between now and Daytona in order to lock himself into the postseason. And honestly, I don't think he deserves to be in the postseason. He's a guy who's missed way too many races. He's a guy who did something stupid which caused him to miss a race, and that alone should disqualify him for the postseason. Yes, I'm being serious. Don't hate me, Chase Elliott fans. Just being honest here. And really look at it. He's a guy who, up until the last couple of weeks, had struggled to run in the top 10. Is that playoff material? Is that championship Final Four material? I know that Elliott fans want redemption after having an amazing regular season last year and having a horrendous playoff run, and we're kind of seeing the opposite of that here. We're seeing a horrendous regular season, and maybe he squeaks into the postseason. Maybe he lights the fire under his ass and finds some speed, but I don't think so. He's very much still recovering, and I think he's still playing hurt, honestly, at this point. And I think he's the guy who doesn't want to admit that he's playing hurt, but he clearly is. The other thing that we have to talk about, 2311 in Toyota. My gosh. These guys come up with new ways to throw away races. You look at Tyler Reddick, he had absolutely every right to go off on his crew.
Looked at it, and then hesitated, and then back it. Unacceptable.
I couldn't agree more, man. I'm sorry you're in this spot again. So run some laps, take care of it, finish up.
It's super ironic because last season they were getting essentially hand-me-down crew members from Joe Gibbs Racing, and they were running into issues. So this season, Michael Jordan, Denny Hamlin both said, screw that, we're going to go ahead and hire and train our own pit crew so that we don't run into these issues. And they're running into these issues. It's just hilarious to me, and it was so egregious for Rennick. He had absolutely every right to be that frustrated and go off that badly on his crew. If I'm him, I'm giving them side eye, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure that they're ready to go for the next race. And if I'm the pit coach over at 2311, I'm sweating bullets right now because clearly something is going on over at 2311 that needs to be fixed, and at this rate, it's not looking good. I think that what's happening with RFK right now 100% validates Brad Keselowski, not just as a championship driver, not just as an owner, but as a person, knowing what's coming up next, because everything at Penske was going fine. I'm stressing the word fine. It wasn't good, it wasn't bad when he left. It was just fine. They were technically in the playoffs. They were technically competing for wins, but he's a guy who saw the potential in what is now RFK, went over there, everybody thought he was crazy, everybody thought it was career suicide, and everybody admitted very nicely that it was going to be an uphill battle for him, and it absolutely was. I remember seeing him in Los Angeles for the very first Clash race, which was the very first race with RFK in that 6 car. The guy looked like he aged 20 years overnight. He was carrying the stress of the world on his shoulders, and he truly had the look of a desperate man. And I could barely talk to the guy because I felt so bad. It was one of those, you're clearly upset, you clearly need space, I'm going to give you that space kind of moments for Brad. And this was just in practice, mind you. Cars hadn't qualified or raced yet, and he already knew how screwed they were as an organization. And seeing him a year later at the exact same event, yes, he was still stressed as an owner-driver. I think you're always going to carry that stress into a race, but Brad was just lighter on his feet. He was a lot more friendly and more like himself, frankly, than he was 1 year ago. And listening to what Brad was saying in the media center after Chris's win, honestly, the guy thought he could win. I thought he could win. Had we seen a caution, Brad was probably going to win that race. And that win, I think, is coming probably this season with how Brad has been running. But he didn't think they were going to be this good coming into Michigan. He admitted that in the media center after the race. And honestly, I'm 100% with him. I didn't think they were going to be this good. I thought that they were going to have top 15 speed for sure, maybe a couple of top 10s. I didn't expect top 5s on a victory. That was completely unexpected for me personally, and it sounds like for Brad too. But this is a great sign for RFK and Brad and Chris, because it means essentially they're going to carry that speed into Vegas, Darlington, Homestead, Kansas, and the rest of the 1.5 mile and intermediate tracks moving forward. Does that mean, oh, they're going to get wins for sure? No, it just means that they are a little bit ahead of everybody else right now with those programs. They need to keep applying that pressure, and they need to keep working on things to make their cars even faster on those 1.5 miles. Can they make those changes? Can they find that little extra speed between now and the end of the season? Maybe. That's a big, big underline, bold circle, underline. Maybe, because I do think they have that potential. It all boils down to making those fine-tooth adjustments and putting in those extra hours at the shop heading into the race weekend. I definitely think Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher are two of the drivers in the garage area who are not afraid to put in the extra work. We've seen that success on the racetrack this season, and I think we're going to see it hopefully into the postseason for the Chris Buescher and the Brad Keselowski fans. But I want to hear what you have to say. What do you think about Brad Keselowski resurrecting RFK? What do you think about Chris Buescher going back-to-back for the first time in his career in the number 17? Do you think he's the next Matt Kenseth over there for RFK? Do you think RFK is back and they are championship favorites? Or do you think it's way too soon to tell and we're going to have to wait and see how the postseason plays out? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're there, make sure you mash that subscribe button and log on to AmericanRacingNetwork.com for the latest motorsports news. ARN, the Motorsports Authority. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you have, make sure you drop the word burnout in the comments right now. I'm Alan Bailey. We'll see you at the track. Bye, Gearheads.